Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Before we look ahead to the New Hampshire primary Tuesday, what have we learned from Iowa? First, that Ted Cruz truly appeals to the GOP base. According to an Edison Research entrance poll, 43% of conservative Iowa voters went for Cruz because he best shared their values. We also learned that when Donald Trump places second, he scolds the public for not appreciating his self-funded campaign and blames the media for giving too much attention to the third-place finisher, Marco Rubio. Wait, not enough media attention, Donald? Really? Rubio got the attention because he surged and got just 1% fewer voters than Trump. He is more electable nationally, Rubio supporters told pollsters. In his third-place victory speech, Rubio did sound like a man campaigning past the primaries.
Hillary Clinton is disqualified from being the President of the United States. Because she stored classified and sensitive information on her email server because she thinks she's above the law. And Hillary Clinton can never be commander-in-chief. Because anyone who lies to the families of people who have lost their lives in the service of this country can never be commander-in-chief of the United States.
Well, maybe not never. Clinton did win Iowa on the Democratic side, though by a record-thin margin. It was a generational divide, with older voters preferring Clinton, the moderate, electable candidate, even though many rated her untrustworthy. Meanwhile, a near equal number of Iowa caucus goers, mostly young, embraced the highly trustworthy, as they see it, immoderate Bernie Sanders, who wants a political revolution. But will we see similar voting patterns in New Hampshire? No way. A whole different demographic there. It's Sanders' neighborhood, a Trump stronghold, and a state where 40% are independents who can vote in either primary. We'll get to all that shortly, but right now, let's bow our heads and note that after poor showings in Iowa, freshman Senator Rand Paul is suspending his campaign. So is former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who won Iowa 8 years ago, and Rick Santorum, who won Iowa 4 years ago. And on the Democratic side, former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley is dropping out as well. The herd is thinning. Yes, time for the horse race. As we wait for the post-Iowa polls to come out, we turn to the wisdom of the betting crowd. With Trump's failure to deliver Iowa on Monday, the betting markets have shifted back in favor of the now perceived establishment frontrunner, Marco Rubio. Microsoft's betting markets research project, PredictWise, shows Rubio and Trump virtually switching places among bettors. 2 days after Iowa, Rubio's chances of triumphing at the Republican convention are now at an astonishing 57%, according to the bettors, while Trump has fallen from his lofty perch in the 50s to just 24%. Ted Cruz, after being cannibalized by Trump in late January, got about a 5-point boost from Iowa and now sits at 14%. Early establishment favorite Jeb Bush has fallen well below 10% in the last few days and now stands just a 3% chance of winning the Republican nomination. At least that's how PredictWise interprets the betting markets. Looking towards Tuesday, it's Trump's casino. He is the current 63% favorite to win the freewheeling New Hampshire primary. Rubio and Cruz are at 21% and 9%, respectively, with other candidates trailing. On the Democratic side, with no clear winner in Iowa, PredictWise's analysis hasn't changed much for Hillary Clinton. Clinton's nomination chances dropped just a few percentage points after Iowa and remain solidly in the mid-80s, while Sanders' initial 3-point boost from Iowa has evaporated. PredictWise shows Bernie's chances of gaining the nomination back down in the mid-teens. All right, time to dig deeper. Joining us from the University of New Hampshire political science professor Dante Scala, co-author of The Four Faces of the Republican Party, The Fight for the 2016 Presidential Nomination. And here in our New York studio, Jamil Smith, a senior editor at The New Republic and host of their first podcast, Intersection. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Jamil, in one of your articles this week, I saw that you described Bernie Sanders as an Obama-style underdog, though thoroughly critical of Obama.
Yes.
Sanders thoroughly critical of Obama?
Well, I think he's critical of the Obama approach to governance. I mean, I think we were calling for a political revolution in the wake of a transformative Democratic presidency. I think inherently you are saying that something went wrong. Not enough was done. And I think that, there is an argument for a new approach. And when you get a new administration, certainly you don't want necessarily a carbon copy. You want that president to bring her or his own perspective. But I think that Clinton certainly has shown more enthusiasm about protecting the gains of the Obama presidency.
How much do you buy the conventional wisdom on the Democratic side that this is Sanders' country, it's his, home state's next door neighbor, and he's going to trounce?
Well, I think that's certainly, bearing itself out in the polls. I think it certainly makes all the sense in the world. And plus, as you mentioned, 40% of the state being independent, just like Bernie Sanders, I think is going to help him immensely. That said, we'll see how the close finish in Iowa actually plays into this particular race. I think Clinton, by winning Iowa, makes things a little bit more urgent for the Sanders campaign, and we'll see if his voters, his supporters respond and give him a big victory.
Let's get the view from New Hampshire. Can you talk about that ability of independents to cross over? If I remember correctly, from 2008, there were independents going for McCain, who had independent cred. There were independents going for Obama, who at that time had independent cred. It was really fascinating in that respect. How do you see that landscape this year?
Well, there is a big pool of undeclared voters, and they outnumber both Republicans and Democrats on the voter registration list. However, most of them are, in fact, closet partisans. They lean strongly Democratic or strongly Republican, and they habitually vote that way. So there are actually very few, maybe 20%, give or take, of those undeclared voters who are truly independents and will actually act as free agents. They're all technically free agents. They all can go in next Tuesday and choose one ballot or the other, but in practice, most of them already have partisan habits.
20% is still a lot, enough to tip an election. Do you get a sense that Trump gets a lot of those independents? Some people could argue that Sanders gets a lot of those independents. Do you have a take?
It's clear that Bernie Sanders in particular is benefiting from a wide lead among those Democratic-leaning independent voters. That's for sure. What's interesting is that on the Republican side, there's not so much of an independent effect for Trump. That is, Trump is doing about as well among registered Republicans as he is among those infamous independents. So where it's really playing out so far is for Sanders, and that might wind up being the margin of victory for Sanders if Clinton can get ahead among the more regular partisan Democrats.
Jamil, you wrote that the Sanders campaign is using Cornel West, the African-American scholar and activist, not so much to make himself acceptable to black voters, but to stoke a certain kind of anger among white voters. What did you mean by that?
Well, I meant that certainly I think using Cornel West, given his really at times vulgar denunciations of the president, would not be exactly the best surrogate to use to try to attract African-American voters, despite his good reputation for his scholarship and whatnot. But I think really what he was doing in Iowa, and why I thought it was smart for Sanders' campaign to deploy him there, was he gets people riled up. And the Sanders base, especially in Iowa, largely white, largely male. And if you get a guy who's ready to rail against the system and echo their sentiments, and does it with the kind of oratorical fervor that Cornel West has, I think it was a smart play. That said, it's a short-term play, and I don't think it's going to end up helping him should a general election present itself.
You said largely white, largely male. We've heard so much about the age gap in the Clinton-Sanders race. Is there a gender gap too?
Oh, certainly. I mean, you saw in Iowa, mostly women, both older and younger, went for Sanders. And so I think Hillary Clinton has a lot to address on that front. I think that certainly she has ammo to do that. Planned Parenthood's endorsement, NARAL, all these different ways that she has emphasized women's rights, reproductive access. I think that those are things that she needs to harp on a little bit more if she hopes to make gains in that area.
I just want to make sure I understood. Did you mean to say that most women of any age went for Clinton.
No, actually, they went for Sanders. It's 35 to 44. The margin was certainly lower than the margin for younger voters, but those older voters from 35 to 44, women went for Sanders.
So what was that Sanders, mostly white, mostly male base reference?
Well, here's the thing: is that you have at least as it's presenting itself online and presenting itself at rallies, you have certainly a very, very wide base of mostly white voters that the Sanders message is appealing to. Now, granted, male, as far as mostly male, you look at the number of voters that were actually showing up at the polls. Now, granted, at this particular election, you had a lot of women coming out for the caucuses, a lot more women, but I mean, the base itself, the Sanders base, as it's presenting itself publicly, is a largely white men.
Interesting. Let me go back to New Hampshire. According to the four lanes of the Republican Party in your book, where would you put Christie and Kasich, who I think I would argue New Hampshire is their last stand if they don't do well? How would you place them compared to Marco Rubio, who sometimes gets called the establishment candidate, but sometimes not?
First, let's look at John Kasich. John Kasich is making a clear play for the moderate lane of Republican voters. And the good news for Kasich is that lane is especially wide in New Hampshire. About half of Republican primary voters will describe themselves as moderates or even liberals to exit pollsters if recent polls are any indication. So Kasich is trying to do what John Huntsman did 4 years ago, which is appeal to moderates and also throw in some of those centrist independents, perhaps even a few Democratic leaners. Chris Christie is making an appeal to be the candidate of somewhat conservative Republicans. And for us, our argument is that somewhat conservative Republicans are really the linchpin for any viable bid for the nomination, because they are, in a Republican primary, the swing voters, the median voters that a candidate has to win over in order to be the nominee. So Christie and Rubio are going head to head for those voters in particular. And I think you're right. If Rubio wins out over Christie, finishes second, say, to Christie's third or fourth, Chris Christie's done. He has nowhere to go after New Hampshire except back to New Jersey.
So how do you characterize Rubio in that model?
Well, the appeal of Rubio is really in the later rounds when it's time to build coalitions. And Rubio's appeal is striking for how widespread it is among various factions of the Republican Party. In Iowa, Rubio won those somewhat conservative voters who are so important in Republican primaries, but he also, unlike, say, a Ted Cruz, could conceivably appeal to a more moderate type of Republican. And then to his right, he has very solid conservative credentials, except perhaps on immigration. But Cruz, I think, is going to have difficulty building that coalition going forward from New Hampshire and beyond.
Do you see Cruz's victory in Iowa, the only clear victor that night, really, giving him any momentum in New Hampshire, or is it just too different a state with too many moderates and not enough evangelicals?
About 1 out of 5 New Hampshire voters describe themselves as very conservative, either religious or more secular, and the more secular have a libertarian streak to them. Cruz may be able to consolidate a good portion of that vote. So I think Cruz momentum may translate to, say, 15 to 20% of the vote in New Hampshire, which, depending on how the rest of the field breaks, could be good enough for second, perhaps third.
Jamil, has it occurred to you that one storyline we haven't seen out of Iowa is first Latino ever to win the Iowa caucuses?
Right. And, you have 2 Latinos in the top 3. And so the idea that, the idea that Cruz can build a momentum, though, I mean, despite that historical note, is, I think, is ludicrous, because I think that you're seeing in the Republican Party a consolidation towards the quote unquote realistic option. And I mean, you have people like John Kasich, being able to market themselves as moderates, and that's not selling. You have Trump, doing what he's doing. That's selling to a certain populace, sure, but it's not a good long-term strategy for the party. So what you see with Rubio, and the reason why I think he's so happy in his speech, and it's talking as if he'd finished first when he finished third, is that he knows that the party apparatus is going to eventually understand that he is the person that's going to give them the best chance against Hillary Clinton in the general.
But in New Hampshire, do you think that, well, what's your reaction to the idea of Cruz as the first Latino nominee, if he actually gets the nomination, when so much of the Republican base seems to be voting on the basis of restricting immigration? Does he try to play it both ways, or does he completely ignore it if he gets the nomination, like he is in the primaries?
I don't think he'll be able to ignore it in a general election. Surely Hillary Clinton, assuming she's the nominee, is going to be reaching out to Hispanic voters and playing up the immigration issue. So no question that he or Rubio would have to deal with that issue sooner or later. It's not at all ludicrous to think that Ted Cruz could unite very conservative voters in the Republican Party, both religious and secular. What is the question, though, is whether he can build a coalition with more moderate types of Republicans. And that is where, if Rubio can win early, and by early I mean not necessarily New Hampshire, but South Carolina or Nevada, then Rubio's in a place where he can start to coalition build, and there's where he might have the upper hand over Ted Cruz.
Do you see Trump losing momentum in New Hampshire, in his lane, because of Iowa?
I think Trump is difficult to peg in an ideological category. He's all over the place, and so are his voters. And what we're watching up here is to see how much of Trump's popularity was a bandwagon effect among voters. That is, voters were not just paying attention to his positions on policy, but also they liked that he was a winner. When everyone made fun of him when he would recite polls, but there was a method to his madness, because voters like to vote for someone they think could actually be the nominee as opposed to wasting their vote. But that's broken a bit now that he lost the first real contest that mattered. And what I'm watching for is, will there be something of a meltdown in Trump's popularity here? Not a complete meltdown, but perhaps enough to bring him back to the rest of the field a bit.
How much do you think Trump's popularity ultimately has to do with the appeal to people who don't want a lot of Mexicans here and don't want a lot of Muslims here?
Clearly, immigration in the Iowa entrance polls, Trump won that category of voters who said that immigration is my most important issue to me in casting my vote. What was striking was how Trump failed for voters with other more prominent issues. And that, to me, suggests something of a ceiling on Trump's support. Does immigration matter to Republican primary voters? Yes, but they're not all voting on that issue. In fact, it seems to me very few are, and we'll see what the case is here in New Hampshire next week.
Do you have an impression, Jamil, as to whether immigration is any more or less important to people in New Hampshire who vote in Republican primaries as compared to Iowa?
No, I mean, I think that it's certainly, it depends on how you look at the electorate in terms of, whether or not you feel like they're trying to go for a more independent streak or, rage against the machine, or do you feel like they're really trying to, consolidate, far right conservative support behind one candidate. I don't necessarily agree that, that they'll ignore Trump for that particular reason, or, I don't think that's going to really factor into the vote so much. I do think that, immigration remains a keystone of it's certainly the principal argument between Cruz and Rubio. And unless they really get into it this weekend during the debate, I don't necessarily think it's going to factor in all that much.
All right, Mr. Scala, thank you. Mr. Smith, you stay here while we bring on some additional evidence. Time for Evidence-Based Politics, where we meet a scholar who studied an issue oversimplified by campaign rhetoric. As the candidates head to New Hampshire, there is one important issue that took many by surprise: heroin. A New Hampshire TV news station poll last year ranked heroin the top issue in the state. In the last decade, New Hampshire saw a 90% rise in the number of people admitted to state treatment programs for heroin and a 500% rise for prescription opiate use. This is a mostly white, mostly rural state. Campaigning in New Hampshire, Chris Christie picked up on the issue early and had his own story to share of his law school friend who, as he put it, had everything until he became addicted to painkillers and overdosed.
There but for the grace of God go I. It can happen to anyone. And so we need to start treating people in this country, not jailing them. We need to give them the tools they need to recover, because every life is precious. Every life is an individual gift from God. And we have to stop judging and start giving them the tools they need to get better.
Of course, it's not just New Hampshire. Nationwide, between 2002 and 2013, heroin-related deaths roughly quadrupled, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But why have the demographics changed so much from urban to everywhere? A study argues it has to do with those prescription opioids. Via Skype from St. Louis, Ted Cicero joins us. He is professor of psychiatry at the Washington University School of Medicine, and his study is entitled The Changing Face of Heroin Use in the United States, a retrospective analysis of the past 50 years. It was published in the journal JAMA Psychiatry, JAMA short for Journal of the American Medical Association. Professor, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to be with you.
In racial or other demographic terms, how much has the face of heroin use changed?
It's completely flipped over. If you look back at the 1960s and 70s, heroin use was principally a problem in inner cities among minority, poor individuals. What we're seeing progressively over the years, but particularly in the last last 2 decades, is a distinct shift to problems occurring in the suburbs and in rural areas.
And we have a graph that we can put up that shows it very starkly, visually, for people to see it, and there it is. So the racial makeup of heroin use, and you tell me if this also applies to prescription drug abuse, not just prescriptions for pain, but the dependency that sometimes comes out of that, has also changed. How much has that changed, and how much is that responsible for this?
The prescription opioid epidemic that you're seeing across the country has really just generally tracked wealthy suburbs, rural areas where there's access to doctors, where people have health insurance, can afford these prescription medications. Inner cities, minorities in particular, don't really have access to physicians for the most part, and they certainly don't have insurance. So they're not really the prime market for prescription drugs. Prescription opiates are typically those that are used by people in suburban or rural locations. Thus, really, when we saw the outbreak occur, which started back in the 90s, with several government reports coming out that pain was vastly being undertreated in this country. So there was a national crunch. In fact, Time magazine ran a front page cover story rather on this, that indicated that pain was vastly undertreated, even though we had good medications available that were not addictive. That was an incorrect statement. They are, of course, addictive, but at the time, there was a perception that most patients don't become addicted. So all of a sudden, we saw a tremendous surge in the use of opiates around the country.
Jamil, you have a question for the professor?
Hi, Professor. Jamil Smith with the New Republic. I have a question about how this ties in with the mass incarceration problem that we're suffering here in America. Of course, there's a program in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where law enforcement is no longer arresting heroin users. If they come in with their equipment to the police station, they'll be taken in for treatment. Is that a model that can be nationalized, do you feel like? And is that something that the presidential candidates should be talking about?
I think we should all be talking about this problem. As people use prescription opioids for a period of time, the gradual step, because as these prescription opioids became more expensive, the cheaper alternative, actually, that was much more accessible, became heroin. And in areas like the Northeast in particular, and the West Coast, the acceptance of heroin now rather than a prescription opioid has become paramount. I think it is wrong-headed for us to ignore this problem. I think it was stated earlier. It is a real problem. We have a heroin epidemic occurring among younger people, particularly, that may have used prescription opioids in the past, which were safe, highly predictable. They're now using a powder form that they're not certain really what they have. They're mixing it up and they're overdosing and dying.
Professor, we're almost out of time in the show. Could you tell us what presidential issue, since we have this now as a New Hampshire primary issue, what presidential solution, I should say, there could be to this?
There absolutely has to be a much more greater emphasis placed on treatment approaches and intervention and prevention approaches. We did a very good job in this country of stigmatizing cigarette smoking, such that it's really now become a minority of people are actually smoking this. We need to take the same attack with prescription drugs and opioids, heroin. Recognize we have a problem, begin to deal with it by spending more money on treatment, and most importantly, spending more money on research to try to figure out why people are taking these drugs, what needs to be satisfied, and then jump on them. But let me get back to the criminalization for a second.
Doctor, I have to leave it there because we're running out of time, and I want to get a last word from Jamil. And actually on that exactly, what do you think the intersection is between the heroin problem in white America and the mass incarceration problem in black America?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like obviously for generations, we've been more than comfortable locking up mostly minority populations for, anything from minor drug crimes to major ones. And now we're seeing that the face of the drug problem has become white. I think, more, inclusive and frankly appropriate remedies are being looked at. So I think what we need to hear from presidential candidates like Chris Christie is, an approach that deals specifically with how something like that would be implemented. Let's not just hear sympathy, let's hear a plan.
Jamil Smith, thank you very much. Professor, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week at this hour following the horse race and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. The New Hampshire primary is this coming Tuesday. A heads up, if you're watching us on Wednesday evening, a Democratic forum with Hillary and Bernie is scheduled for tonight at 9 o'clock on CNN. They meet again Thursday night. The Republicans debate on Saturday. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.